act play written by Wolfgang Vogel. It is entitled The Field of Division, the Open Vessel, and the Other. Lights rise slowly on a sparse consulting room. Winter light through a single window. Two chairs angled slightly towards each other. A faint hum of a radiator, and then silence. The clinician sits still, notebook on his knee. The patient sits forward, posture contained, hands loosely clasped. Clinician: where would you like to begin today? Patient: it's I guess it's funny how you remember things over the years. I remember when I was going to junior college, and even before then, that I had this dream of working as the head of a psychology department at a university. And even then, I would reminisce about things that may or may not have happened. But I specifically remember having an office and being so busy with intellectual pursuits and, most importantly, being looked up to and respected. I would be needed in my department. I would be called upon in meetings, and I would give assessments to the group, and I would discuss matters of the mind. A faint warm halo touches the edges of the stage, an idealized glow. The patient's hands make small unconscious gestures of arranging papers. The clinician inhales quietly, attentive. Tell me about what you think you remember. What's important for me to know about this part of you? Patient: I recall now, it was a married man, an acquaintance of mine in my second year of school. And he would take me aside occasionally after class, and he told me about his partner, who was involved with spiritualist seances during the weekend at his home. He revealed in the midst of these mystical events, it was common to utilize automatic writing. And the guests, they would sit across in this large farmhouse, and they would sit at a very long wooden table, whereupon ghosts, entities, spirits would expose secret dalliances, as he called them. I remember this as if it was yesterday. Names and depraved acts from others, from some unknown origin. And they were very descriptive scenes, and they would just fall out of his pen during these special meetings. This automatic writing would occur. And of course, I thought it was pretty peculiar, this whole idea, especially this unknown other that would relay memories and experiences that were not his. And it was quite explicit and, how shall I say, provocative as well. Lighting cools slightly. A faint low hum enters, like a distant wind through an old house. The patient's gaze drifts downward. His posture loosens. Clinician: yes, go on. Patient: well, as you can imagine, I had a great deal of skepticism, and in some sense, until one day, these ghosts that he talked about years later, it felt like that they visited me, and they took up residence where I was living. I had two roommates at the time, and I just rented an 18th century farmhouse on the edge of a large field. I would sit in the study. One of my passions was art, and I was doing some hands-on art, some assembled work. Unthinkable, unimaginable images would have started to appear. It was a horse's muzzle, complete with a neighing cry, that sat right across on the sideboard. There was a young man riding a plow horse, galloping, totally out of control, across a snowy field. It was through these images on my TV room drywall that these lives would present themselves. Eventually, in my studies, and specifically my journaling, I found myself writing someone's name over and over and over again. Automatically, it seemed just to happen. The name Claire would come up along with these overwhelming feelings of sadness and feelings of loss. A narrow, warm shaft isolates him briefly at Claire. The clinician leans forward a fraction, then stills. Clinician. It does sound quite surreal, I must say. And yet I know you have a great imagination. I find it interesting that you combine these dreamlike features, the extraordinary, into your life, and according to you, your rather mundane life. This appears to give you satisfaction, this dreamlike structure that permeates and gives your life meaning. Patient. Well, I know that meaning can fall through and in our lives, and it can show up in all kinds of different ways, in ways that cannot be immediately understood. In that sense, I can only imagine myself using I was probably around 14, and then it was something about loyalty, or there'd be a problem. Walk hand in hand with me. And then there was just a flood and this overwhelming desire. It was the beginning of language, and there were now words to describe events. A faint flicker of light. The patient's body jolts and breath catches. The clinician's hands still above the notebook. Clinician. And these thoughts that you just described, these ideas of another. Where are you in this event? Patient. Some part of me was back at college. And I remember laid out on a table before me was Warhol and his repetitive images of Marilyn Monroe, the large silk screen of a car crash, the repeated images over and over, these death-like images. I remember being drawn to them somehow. These visions, something, and somebody wants me to remember. It's trying to remember. A soft, rhythmic pulse of light echoing the repetition. The patient's fingers tap once more unconsciously. His posture softens further. Clinician. Okay, I want you to feel free to say whatever's on your mind. Symbols, stories, events, anything. Please continue. Patient. I had quite an interesting dream the other night. It was a memory from an institutionalized man I had read about over the years. It was of him walking the back streets of his hometown, and he just had a plaid coat on. In this dream, he pointed to the therapist home he once visited. It sat on the edge of a long sloping hill. I got a thrill out of inciting desire and the threat of exposure, of breaking into her home office. Something that he was hiding, a bit of unpleasantness, I guess. It was more like deep anger. I remember now that he was part of that spiritual group that I mentioned earlier. The one that summoned ghosts, spirits, and the group I talked about around that farmhouse table. I saw him in this dream, and he was there. He was holding hands in the seance. He began writing in one of those continuous motions about some deep love he had, a deep love that was cut off, blocked. He appeared before me and to tell me his story. He was just as plain as day. His raincoat was still wet from a sudden rain shower. His hands were outstretched, and they were reaching now towards me. A faint rain sounds begin, barely audible. It stops abruptly when the dream goes dark. The patient's shoulders suddenly drop. Clinician. And what happened to that therapist you mentioned? This man was visiting in your dreams, you say? Patient. I don't know. The dream went suddenly dark. Lights contract slightly, then return to baseline. Clinician taking notes. He writes, a rupture of desire, an energy blocked off, yet thrilling, searching, a certain form of potency locked under a plaid raincoat, desire thwarted and repressed. The faint pencil scratch, the clinician's breath deepens once, then steadies. Did you find this somewhat startling, these operations just seemingly coming forward in your life? Messages, depictions of someone else's life, this other as you're talking about? Patient. Yes, I did. But as you know, I'm an avid reader, so I recently returned to one of my psychiatric journals to this half-forgotten dog-eared page to see if I could make sense of things. And I inadvertently came across a philosopher from the early 20th century. I have it written here. His name was Elihard von Damaris. And he laid out a case where one of his clients confused a cigar with a figurine of Christ. It was two separate things put together to create a third thing. Clinician. Two things come together to make a third thing. Patient. Gold halo around my head, blessing me. We both had a gold band around my future in this dream, which a faint golden halo I guess could brushes the patient's face, barely perceptible. Almost a gold clinician halo. And in this case, one. I want you to do me a favor. As we begin to finish our session for today, I want you to close your eyes. The clinician lifts the patient's arm and tells him as his arm descends slowly, he'll begin to dream a dream. And he goes on, and tell me what's happening right now. What comes to mind? Lighting shifts to dusk amber. A distant field, ambience emerges. The patient's posture softens into childhood. Patient. I was in a field. It had just snowed. My brother and sister were back at the house. I was just a small child, and we just moved to this new neighborhood. They cleared out a potato field and a portion of a cemetery, and now it was filled with ranch houses. Our house was there. It was dusk. I crept into the stable where the horses slept. I remember in a corner, a farmer who lived next door sat, and he was smoking a rather large cigar, as I recall. And there was a glow around him as he watched me and the horses. I sat in the corner, and I could see it all very clearly. There was a little boy. He was corralled. He was chased, and he was flooded with feelings. It was a forgotten memory. It was an unspeakable event. It was an image of a little boy being held down, leaving his body. He couldn't recognize himself, and he spoke to me. He told me something had changed. He said he became an open vessel for the other. He said he would find words someday. I think that's when I became a vessel. A soft, hoarse exhale, a faint glow behind the patient. The barn door is ajar. Lights contract to a tight, intimate circle. The patient breathes as his breath becomes thin and trance-like. Patient. An image appears of a boy, and he's sitting at a table. He's using crayons, and he's uttering half-spoken words. He's scribbling. He's scribbling pictures of horses, ghosts, houses, flooded rooms. There's smoke infused into all of the images. And there's a figure on a cross. And just across from him, a university office. There's a plaque on the wall with the words psychology department on it. father sits on the edge of his bed, puffing on a large cigar. He doesn't know what it means yet. Clinician. Making a note in his journal, he writes, as long as his transference takes this form and does not interfere with the work he is doing in therapy, there is no need to intervene in any way to temper his speech. Patient slowly pulling together parts of his past, motivated by an unknown knowledge. This unknown known is cast throughout our session today. There is a certain despair, a slight melancholia, nevertheless. His speech continues to come from the other. His speech is from the other. Lights hold for one extra breath as the patient, eyes closed, hands slightly lifted, as if still descending. His hand moves slowly down. A faint crayon on paper sound. Blackout.